Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So with the recent conflict in Gaza, I began asking a bunch of questions. How on earth did we get into the situation that we are in today, where Palestinians have been exiled from their land and Israel has become the dominant power? I also then started asking questions like, how was the modern day Middle East formed in the way that it is today compared to how it was in the past? And my journey led me to this book called A Line in the Sand. Now, this book has it's a historical analysis of how this region was formed. And the story has a bunch of twists and turns, man. It has a bunch of ups and downs, a lot of backstabbers, a lot of drama, a lot of things all over the place. And in this video, I aim to kind of give you a summary, a synopsis of exactly the type of treachery that took place that ultimately led the Muslims to be in exile, the Palestinians to be in exile from their own land. So buckle up, because this is going to be a bit of a depressing ride. So what happened was that there was a guy called T.E. Lawrence. And this guy called T.E. Lawrence, he came to the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula and said, listen, I'm going to help you guys get your independence from the Ottoman Empire. So an uprising was planned, and the Arabs in the peninsula were promised that they would be able to have an Arab nation state that would be free from the Ottomans, such as Syria, what they call Transjordan, Palestine, would all be able to be governed under one Arab state. Now, whilst T.E. Lawrence was making these plans and doing this with the Arabs, the British and the French came together with two representatives from each side. One, his name was George Picot, and the other guy, his name was Sykes. Sykes being British, George Picot being French. And they sat together and they started basically creating this map, right? Saying that this is what we're going to get as France, and this is what we're going to get as Britain. Right now, bear in mind, the Ottoman Empire used to govern this region. But what they'd done is they already started dividing up this land and saying, we're going to get this and so is going to get that. On that note, guys, if you want to learn the skills of business yourself, then we have something for you as well. We've got something called the Righteous Rich Skills Academy. Just look at the type of money that these new entrepreneurs are making. These are guys that don't necessarily have a business that's like fully fledged, that's making 5, 10, 20K a month, but they benefited off what? Our just training and our live calls within our community. Just look on screen. This brother made 2K, this brother made 1K, then his second 1K, then his third 1K, all in the space of 2 weeks. This brother bought 1.5K sale. Guys, these brothers are making money. Allah Mabadi, right? Brother Munir here increases revenue by 50%. Allah Mabadi.
Been in Righteous and Rich for about a month. My revenue was down quite a bit. You know, at the time that I joined, I wasn't even able to pay my bills. And so by Allah's permission, I've been able to produce much better content, get much better at just generating leads. And so my revenue has gone up by 50%. So alhamdulillah, I appreciate you guys for helping me navigate this competitive market. I'm very optimistic that it's not just going to be 50%, soon it's going to be 3x, inshallah, bidnillah. So jazakallah khair.
This is just on the back of the Righteous Rich Skills Academy. So if you want to learn these skills, click the link below, Skills Academy. Peace. When all of this is happening, T.E. Lawrence, when he hears about this, is mind blown, because he's like, I've promised the Arabs that they're going to have their own state, whereas you guys are actually planning to backstab them. You don't plan to give them a state. You plan to basically colonize those regions and run them for your own personal benefit. Now, the reason why UK wanted to govern over the regions of, for example, Palestine and the region of, for example, Iraq and so on and so forth, is because of economic reasons. Now, right next to Palestine, you've got Egypt, right? And in Egypt, they have the Suez Canal. Now, the Suez Canal basically revolutionized the way trade was done, because you could not go via ship into Asia from Europe except by going all the way around Africa. But by creating this man-made canal, what you could do is you could just cut through. So that was a primary economic trade route that the British owned and they had to protect for themselves. So they said, look, by us having Palestine, which is directly next to Egypt, we've positioned ourselves in a position of strength where we can protect the Suez Canal and thus protect that trade and be the leading economic power in the world. Also, Prime Minister Lloyd George, he insisted on wanting Mosul, which is in Iraq. And the reason why is because they had reason to believe that there was crude oil present in Iraq. So they wanted to keep that region for themselves, and they were like, we'll give to France everything else. So they had their own selfish economic reasons why they wanted to keep those regions for themselves. Whereas the Arabs had been led to believe that, no, you're going to get your independence, but ultimately what they're going to do is that they're planning to backstab the Arabs and keep that control in their hand. Now, whilst this is happening, World War I begins. And Arthur Balfour, he basically comes up with the idea that actually what we need to do is we need to support a Jewish homeland, right? We need to be able to give Jews their own place to live. And what better place to send them to other than Palestine, right? What better place to send them to other than Palestine? So write the Balfour Declaration. It's a message that he sends to Lord Rothschild. And he says to him, listen, we as Britain support the Jewish homeland. Now, the reason why they wanted to do this is because, remember, they didn't really care about the Arabs. They were just using the Arabs for their own personal benefit. And at the end of the day, Britain is looking out for Britain. So they said, look, if we need to be in Palestine so we can protect the Suez Canal, it makes sense that we've got our allies in Palestine. The Arabs are not really our allies, but the Jews, they're a closer ally to us than Palestine, right? They were rich, they were wealthy, they had a strong lobby, so on and so forth. So that, look, if we support the Jews, then we're going to get their support in Palestine because they're going to be there. And we also get their support on a geopolitical level as well. When World War I was happening and all these problems and chaoses and crises were happening, they saw the Jews to be a force that was influential enough for them to want their support. So they said, if we give them that support, we'll have that support on a geopolitical level, right? Against Germany and whatnot and so on and so forth. But we will also have the support of the Jews in that region that we want to dominate because the Arabs might give us trouble. But if we just start to slowly dilute that place with Arabs and start putting more Jews there, we start getting that extra support from the people that we see to be our allies, i.e. the Jews. Now, when all this is happening, actually, the Americans, when they heard about this, I think it was Woodrow Wilson, his cabinet, they actually turned around and said to the people, listen, this is going to be bloodshed, man. You're actually going to create bloodshed in the region. Like, you put in the Jews inside a state that's already run by the Arabs who were Muslim, and there was also Jews and Christians that were there as well. So you guys are going to create bloodshed. Don't do this. But Britain didn't listen. They did it. So they started migrating the Jews into that region. And lo and behold, what happened? Exactly what everyone feared. Violence broke out. The Palestinians and the Jews obviously clashed. Think about it, right? As a Palestinian, you're seeing people come and taking your house, taking your places, literally building off of your land. Obviously, that's going to lead to tensions that ultimately led to a lot of clashes, a lot of murders, a lot of massacres. Now, when this happened, Britain realized, oh, snap, this is a problem. So they started to limit the migration of Jews into Palestine. They started to limit the migration of Jews into Palestine. Now, whilst Britain's limiting the migration of Jews into Palestine, what you have to understand is that Britain's also going through tensions with France. Now, I'm not going to go into the tensions that Britain and France went through. The book talks about it in a lot of detail, a lot of depth. But in essence, Britain and France were having their tensions. And at the same time, what's happened is that Britain, who previously has been a supporter of Zionists and a supporter of the Jews actually coming into Palestine, now has limited the Jewish migration because they're like, there's no way for us to control this, right? There's too much massacre that's going on. France, who's having issues with the UK, now sees this as an opportunity to actually team up with the Zionists and fund them to actually engage in acts of terrorism against Britain. So the next few years actually turn out to be crazy because what happens now is that Jewish terrorist groups form, such as the Haganah, where they actually start to create strategic plots and plans to basically terrorize the Brits so they could force them into allowing that immigration to take place again so that the Jews could carry on coming into what they claim to be their homeland. Now, obviously, Britain fought back. They tried to resist as much as possible, but there was a lot of problems that were taking place, right? Lord Moyne got murdered and assassinated in Egypt, who was one of the primary Brits that was in that region. And the escalation that came from the Jewish terrorist groups was just so much. Let me quote to you a few things. So in 1946, you have the King David Hotel bombing, right? Where the Irgun, they orchestrated, which is one of the terrorist groups, Zionist terrorist groups, they orchestrated an attack in Jerusalem, bombing the hotel, which housed which was the British administrative headquarters at the time. The British embassy was bombed in Rome in 1946. The bombing of the British Colonial Club in London There was an attempted bombing of the Colonial office in London. They actually planted a bomb, but the bomb didn't go off. And there was a letter bomb campaign where the Zionist terrorist gangs had basically sent letter bombs to high-profile British figures such as Winston Churchill, Anthony Eden, Clement Attlee, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, these bombs, most of them were intercepted and these fatalities and casualties didn't take place. But all of this was just showing a escalation that was coming from the Jews that Britain couldn't actually, handle, especially on the back of World War II. The world was in chaos. Britain was in economic debt. They had to kind of look out for themselves. This pressure from the Jews is just too scary now. There was even a planned biological attack that they were planning to do in the UK, where the Lehi, which is one of these terrorist organizations amongst the Jews, Lehi, which was one of these terrorist organizations, Zionist terrorist organizations, devised a plan to actually pour in cholera bacteria into the British water supply. They planned to pour in cholera bacteria into the British water supply as a form of biological warfare against the British. So what this did was this put Britain all together on the back foot, and they realized, you know what? We're just going to get out of Palestine. It's just not worth us trying to hold this region for our benefits. We're just going to get out and, basically let the Zionists take over. There was a lot of propaganda that was coming from America as well. The American Zionist lobby became very strong, and it was lobbying the politicians. They got the support of a bunch of different celebrities in Hollywood. They got Frank Sinatra. They got all these big names to support. Obviously, on the back of the Holocaust that had happened in World War II, there was a lot of sympathy that people felt towards the Jewish people. But all in all combined, ultimately led towards this feeling of, you know what, we're going to support a Jewish state. So the support of the Jewish state was there. Britain itself had removed itself because it couldn't actually withstand the terrorist attacks that were coming in. France was supporting the Jewish terrorist organizations in actually bombing and attacking Britain and England. And all of this just led to Britain leaving. Now, of course, there's a lot more details, there's a lot more complexity and sophistication with regards to, more of what actually took place. But fundamentally, what I just wanted to highlight here is that ultimately, the Zionists, they bullied their way into Palestine. They effectively used terrorism. They were terrorists. They used terrorism to take over Palestine. Now, of course, it was tragic and terrible what happened in the Holocaust. But that doesn't warrant and justify you now then usurping someone else's land and causing a mass exodus, removing them from their land and massacring them and so on and so forth. So for me, it's mind-blowing that, Palestinians will get placed as terrorists or whatever have you because they're trying to defend their homeland. But actually, the only reason why Israel was given Israel was because of terrorism. They effectively used terrorism to gain their independence, right? Or to establish, not even their independence, because it wasn't even their land, but to establish their land, right? Or to establish their authority and governance over someone else's land. And America supported it, right? So it's just so crazy to me that now you see them just throwing the word terrorism or terrorist around so loosely, but in actuality, their state was formed on the back of terrorism. And that's the point that I want to get through. Like the Israel state was formed on the back of terrorism. So there's a lot more details and things to consider and ponder. Obviously, there was a lot of treachery that happened from the Muslims. The Muslims also didn't support their brothers in Palestine at the time. There was a bunch of things that was going on. This book is just, scratching the surface really on what happened. I have a few more reads that I'm going to be going through, inshallah ta'ala. This one right here, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, by Ilan Pepi, who's actually an Israeli historian, right? And he talks about what happened to the Muslims in Palestine, being an Israeli himself. Then there's the Israeli lobby, John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, they wrote this book talking about how the Israeli lobby is formed and the actual role that it plays in terms of influencing American US foreign policy, because it's only through American support that they're able to get away with the crimes that they get away with. And the reason I'm going through this is because I'm sick and tired of being ignorant. Like, I actually want to know what happened, right? And ignorance is poison, man. It's when you don't know the oppression that you've been through that your enemy can actually make you feel and seem as the oppressor himself. So it's important that you know exactly what happened. And when you have conversations, you're able to articulate exactly what happened. With that said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you guys. I'll keep you guys updated on my studies as they develop. May Allah Azza wa Jalla unite the Muslims and free us from the oppressors and give victory to his slaves. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.